PJ Fleck will try to save a sinking ship while Scott Frost is on a mission for 6 wins. Hi, I'm Aaron Muller, and this is episode 13 of the Cobsmacked Podcast. This is a Nebraska football podcast where we cover the Husker season and team news as it progresses throughout the year. Every video episode is uploaded to YouTube, and the audio versions can be found on Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you enjoy the content, please consider leaving a like and following wherever you're listening. Also consider sharing. It helps me grow the podcast and helps me reach more ears. Getting into this week's preview, we have a Week 7 matchup against the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Kickoff is at 11 a.m. on ESPN2. The game is in Minneapolis, so it's an away game for the Huskers. Weather-wise, it's supposed to be sunny, mid-50s, so it'll be a little bit chilly, but the wind is going to be a factor, I think. It's going to be 10 to 20 mile-per-hour winds during the game, so that might have an effect on the passing game, but I feel like both of these teams are going to try to keep it on the ground anyway. Looking at Minnesota, though, they are from the Big Ten West, as we are. They have a record of 3-2 and 1-1 in conference. So their head coach, PJ Fleck, has a total record of 26-19 at Minnesota, and he is 3-1 against Nebraska. So under PJ Fleck, Minnesota has had Nebraska's number. They've won 2 in a row. That includes coming to Lincoln and beating us. They always play us well. They always play us kind of above where they even sit on the season, even if we go into the game thinking that Minnesota's not great. As last year, they were out a bunch of players because of the COVID, and they still squeaked out a win against us. Adrian, in his mind on his podcast, he said that Minnesota is a quiet rival in his mind. He was asking the guys, some rivals in the Big Ten, Michigan State was brought up, Iowa was brought up as a rival, and he said that in his mind, Minnesota is kind of a sneaky rival because they always play us well, and they kind of have our number currently. They are coming off of a bye week this week as well, and they are 2-2 after coming off a bye week, so PJ Fleck knows how to get them ready. The extra week of practice, he knows how to have some schemes built up for that coming out of the bye week. So on top of that, they only have 5 games under their belt so far, so they're pretty fresh in comparison. This will be our 8th game going into it, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Also up for grabs in this matchup is the Broken Chair Trophy. So I was looking back at it because I knew it was fairly recent. I knew it hasn't always been a thing, and it's not something you even hear about on the TV a lot, but it's kind of a funny, stupid origin story. So the Golden Gopher is the mascot for the Minnesota Golden Gophers. So Goldie Gopher, his Twitter account, and a parody Bo Pelini account called Faux Pelini, they made a bet in 2014, I think maybe, and the Goldie Gopher wanted to make a bet on the game, and Faux Pelini said, if Nebraska wins, then he gets $5, and if Minnesota wins, then he gets to break a chair over Minnesota's back. So the fan bases love it. They actually made a trophy, the Broken Chair Trophy, and the fans love it. The players love it. The coaches can even be seen having the trophy, but the administrations from the universities tend to distance themselves from it as they don't acknowledge it as a true trophy or a true matchup type of thing in that regard. But it went back and forth between the teams. Fans brought it to the game. If they want it, they want it. They raise it up like a regular trophy. But in 2016, it actually disappeared after Nebraska won the game. But it returned the next year. But now it's more as a fundraising tool as opposed to just a funny fan thing that they bring to the stadium. It's now used as a fundraising tool. So on the Nebraska side, they raise funds for the Team Jack Foundation, and on the Minnesota side, they raise funds for the Masonic Children's Hospital. So it started out origin as a funny Twitter exchange between 2 accounts, and now it turned into something that actually does good for both fan bases. So I think that was pretty neat. Getting into actual football, we have to look at Minnesota's offense. They run multiple sets, but they're really rush focused. They like to put extra linemen on the field to help support that run game, but I think that's going to be a little subject to change now. We'll get into the details on why that is, but they're averaging 24.4 points per game. Take that up against the Black Shirts, who are only allowing 17.9 points per game, and you have a tough matchup there. So the Black Shirts are going to have their hands full. They have been successful against the run this year, with the exception of last game, which I think they kind of got worn down throughout the game anyway, but up to the point in the third quarter, they were holding Michigan even to a low amount of yards. Michigan State, their top running back in the country, we held them. So I feel like if we can get that same kind of consistency from them against Minnesota, then we should be in good position. Their senior running back, Mohammed Ibrahim, actually is out for the season. He had a really good game against Ohio State. That was the first game of the season. I was enjoying watching him. It's one of those things where I may not be a fan of Minnesota, but I'm a fan of good players. I like watching good players play. And he was coming in as a senior. You could see him having a 2,000-yard rushing season, and you were just excited for him for that. And the way he was playing against Ohio State, you could totally see that happening. And then it turns out like he had a season-ending injury in the first game. So he's probably going to be looking forward to the NFL. He won't be coming back. Their backup that filled in for him is sophomore running back Trey. He filled in really nicely. He came in and he had a few games where he went well over 100 yards. He broke the 500-yard mark in just a few games, but now he's done with a season-ending injury, and it sounds like more serious also. It could be career-threatening injury. They haven't released exactly what is causing it, but he spent like 8 days in the hospital. So I think that him and his family are more thankful for the fact that he's just okay, like that he's healthy and safe now, as opposed to focusing on football. So he might not come back at all, which you don't like seeing that from either one of those guys. From any football player that gets injured and has the kind of season-ending situation put on them like that. So I hope that both of those guys, are able to get back to health, and Ibrahim has a good career in the NFL, and that Trey, if he wants to continue with his football career, he's able to do so. Looking back at the depth chart, though, they have a true freshman running back, Marquis Irving. He will likely get the start. There is a few other guys that will probably get some playing time as well, but he will more likely get the start. Irving has carried 25 times for 112 yards. He has a 28-yard long run this year. But as I said, he's a true freshman, so he's small. He's like 5'10", and he's only like 180 pounds. So he's inexperienced. He hasn't had a ton of snaps at the collegiate level, and he's small. He still hasn't been able to build up and do the strength training to get up to a Big Ten size. So I feel like that's going to play a role in it. So I feel like a lot of the shift is going to probably be put on their quarterback. And looking at the quarterback, you have senior quarterback Tanner Morgan. He will more than likely have a bigger role this week as opposed to previous weeks, previous seasons. He hasn't been doing as well. His career has kind of gone up and down with performance-wise. When he first came in as a freshman, sophomore, he was one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Lately, though, he's struggled, and I don't know if that's a mixture of him just kind of falling off, or if the wide receivers he's just not meshing well with, or the guys that he was really close with early in his career, they moved on. They went to the NFL or whatever, and so now he doesn't have the tools that he had before. Whatever the reason is, he's not playing as well this season. Last season wasn't very great either. This season, he's only throwing for a 52% completion rate. He only has 4 touchdowns with 2 interceptions. He has been sacked 8 times on the year, which, ask Adrian if 8 sacks sounds good. He'd probably take that in a heartbeat. But he played poorly against Bowling Green when he was under pressure. He went 5 for 13 and 59 yards with 2 interceptions and 1 lost fumble. So he did not have a good game when he was under pressure, and Bowling Green is 2-4 on the season. They're not like, some defensive powerhouse. So we'll get into that a little later, how that should play well into Nebraska's favor. But their saving grace on the offensive side is their offensive line. PJ Fleck likes to run what he calls a superset, where they bring extra linemen in. As I said, that they can bring in 8 linemen at one time on the field and just try to push the ball. You can't do anything about it at that point, is what the theory is anyway. Their line is the deepest depth-wise in the FBS. They have the most combined starts in the country on the starting side of it, and every starter on that offensive line is a senior. So every starter has experience, and they've been there for a while. They've been in that program for a while. They did allow Bowling Green to get after the quarterback all night and get some pressure on Tanner, but outside of that, they are focused on the run side of things, and I think that bodes well for this true running back to come in. It's kind of similar to the Michigan situation, where even if the running backs aren't great, even if the quarterback isn't great, which looking back on Michigan now, like those guys stepped up, so I'm still going to give them their respect there. But this guy's new. He's small. He's undersized. He's inexperienced. But having a veteran, the most veteran offensive line in the country ahead of you, blocking for you, making these holes for you, it really puts that guy in a good situation to succeed. It raises the floor for that offense. As I mentioned, a good offensive line leads to good offenses. It might not make you great, but it'll make you good at the very least. So I think if we can get past him and get to that running back, it's a different story, but that's a big if. You have to be able to get past the offensive line first. Notable players on the offensive side. So if more of the focus is pushed towards Tanner Morgan on the pass game. You have a couple wide receivers you need to mention. So you have senior wide receiver Chris Ottman-Bell. He missed a few games this season already, but he's a veteran guy. He's back, so he's a veteran guy. He's going to make some catches. He's going to make some big plays, and that's a guy you're going to have to watch out for specifically. You have a couple sophomore wide receivers, Dylan Wright and Daniel Jackson. While Ottman-Bell was out, they came in and they combined for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So they filled in really well as well. But again, they focus on the run side of things. They don't pass it a ton. And Tanner Morgan's not exactly consistent as far as getting it to them anyway. Flipping over to the defensive side, they run a 4-3. You're going to see that a lot when we get into the Big Ten schedule. I mean, you have seen it a lot already, but getting into the rest of it, you're going to see a lot of 4-3 just because Big Ten likes to have those 4 big linemen down to try to get pressure with just those 4 if they don't have to bring anybody else. Defense is only allowing 19.6 points per game, and Nebraska's averaging 31.9 points per game. So that's a bigger gap there as opposed to our defense and what their offense is able to put up. Our offense is one of the more dynamic offenses that they've played against this season. So I feel like they're going to have a harder time stopping us as opposed to us having a harder time stopping them. Stat-wise, they are only allowing 77 rushing yards per game. We are averaging 223.6 yards per game. I think their numbers are a little skewed there. There was a lot of guys on their side of reporting and media that was like kind of holding that 77 yards per game up as we have one of the top rushing defenses in the country. They also haven't played anybody that likes to run the ball singularly. They had a game against Colorado where they shut them out completely. They didn't score any points, and they only got 63 total yards of offense. That is including their negative 19 rushing yards total. So that skews the number a little bit. They've played Ohio State, likes to pass the ball, and they even still ran over 200 yards on them. They've played Maryland of Ohio. They've played Bowling Green. They've played Colorado, and they played Purdue. So Purdue likes to throw the ball a lot. I think they threw it over 50 times. So they haven't played anybody that likes to run the ball, so they don't really have the numbers there for that anyway. 77 rushing yards per game is still, what it is. Take it for what you will, but they haven't played rushing offense like we have. So I think that's going to play a role there. Their corners on top of that have been trouble for them all year. Even if the stats don't really show it, they've been giving up a ton of yards per game. They give up 230 yards per game in the air. And it seems like when you watch the gameplay, they tend to lose the tight ends and their running backs in slip screens and crossing routes, shallow crossing routes. And that's kind of our thing lately, especially last game. If you look at the Michigan game, we ran a lot of tight end passing yards and running backs. We ran Ramir Johnson, kind of wheel routes or screen passes and things like that. So if we kind of continue with that scheme, then we should be in good position because they don't really know how to defend that well, or they blow the coverage there. So between that and then the option game that we're able to run, I think that's going to really mess their defense up, and I think we have a good opportunity here on offense. Their defense has had 12 sacks on the year. They didn't have any in the first 2 games, but they did have all those 12 sacks come in the last 3 games. So they're averaging 4 sacks a game now in the last 3 games. And on top of that, they have 4 interceptions and 5 fumble recoveries on the season. And out of those 9 turnovers, they have scored on 7 of them. So if they can get the turnovers, that's kind of how they've capitalized on the games that they have won. They capitalize on turnovers. So that being one of our weaker sides of things, we need to be able to make sure to protect the ball, not put it on the ground, not throw picks, and we should be in good position there. Notable players on the defensive side. So they have senior linebackers Jack Gibbons and Mariano Sori-Marin. They're team leaders in tackles. They are combined for 58 tackles on the team. The linebacking core is pretty solid. The defensive line is pretty solid. But I mentioned those corners in the secondary and as a whole is not great. You have the senior defensive linemen, speaking of them. You have Boye Mafi and Thomas Rush. They lead the team in sacks at 8.5 combined. Mafi himself has 5 of those. So those 2 guys are going to be going up against Ben Hart and Corcoran on the outsides. Freshmen, again, they're young. It's kind of the same scenario that we were in last week where they have really good pass rushers on the outside and we have really inexperienced linemen on the outside. So that's going to be really the only thing that concerns me in the game, honestly, like looking through all of the stats and matchups and things across the board. Their defensive line against our offensive line is the only thing that kind of worries me that would give them a chance in the game. looking at their special teams, they have the sophomore Australian punter Mark Crawford. It seems like all of the punters across the Big Ten and across the country are Australian because they're good at what they do. This guy was the Big Ten Special Teams Player of the Week. He had 6 punts for a 51.3 yard average. That is one big boot. He was booting it and consistently. He had a career-long 60-yard punt twice against Purdue. So he can kick it. That's going to help them in their field position game, and that's something that we struggle with ourselves. So that could be something to pay attention to. They have the kicker, field goal kicker is a senior, Matthew Trickett. He is 6-9 on field goals this season, and 2 of those misses come from 50 yards or more. So at reasonable distances, he's really consistent. And given how this series has played out in the past where they've beaten us by a field goal or beaten us by a couple points, field goals are going to come in very important as far as that goes. So another thing to watch out for. Getting into the keys of the game, our offensive line needs to continue growth with Teddy Prohaska going out and Ben Hart coming back in. Ben Hart? Yes, Ben Hart coming back in. So I heard that they might move Ben Hart back to the right side where he was more comfortable, and they might move Corcoran back to the left side. I don't know that that's necessary. It seemed like when Ben Hart did come in, he played well on the left side, as I mentioned last at the recap, that he played the best on the offensive line once he did come in. So if you keep him on the left side, keep Corcoran on the outside, it doesn't matter. They're both on the outsides against those pass rushers. So either way, they're going to have to grow. They're going to have to grow from last week. Everybody's inexperienced with the exception of Cam Jurgens and Matt Sichterman, but they just need to continue growing. They've been doing better every game. They just need to continue that. They need to be able to help establish the run game, make the holes for the running backs, give Adrian time to run, give Adrian time to make decisions. But we need to be able to pick up first downs behind that offensive line and eat up some clock. That's going to help the defense stay off the field. That's going to help the offense maintain momentum. That's just going to help everybody all the way around. Speaking of the black shirts, that's the second key in the game. They need to be able to wreak havoc on the defensive side of things. They need to shut down this inexperienced backup running back despite having a big O-line to kind of shield behind. So if they can stop the run game, that's going to force Tanner Morgan to throw more passes. They should be able to get him under pressure. Garrett Nelson should be able to get back there. Darian Daniels should be able to get back there. Still is going to be able to get his hands up. He's deflected a few this year already. But we've seen that Bowling Green can get back there and mess him up and mentally make him make mistakes and kind of shut him down as well. So if Bowling Green can get back to him and they're not a defensive powerhouse, then we should be able to as well, given all of the guys that we have. We have Luke Reimers coming in. We have Jojo Doman coming in off the blitzes on the corner side. So you should be able to get back there and disrupt just their offense as a whole. Doing so would create more turnovers, so we need to be able to get those interceptions when he does throw bad balls. And I mentioned the wind being a factor. So if we do force them to go through the air, interceptions are more likely going to happen, especially if he's not throwing accurately, especially if he's under pressure the whole time. So interceptions are going to be, I feel like it's almost a guarantee that there's going to be one on either side of the field. So whether that be us or them, there's going to be interceptions. There's probably going to be fumbles as well. They have that young and experienced back. He hasn't played a ton of collegiate snaps. He's probably not used to getting hit as hard as he will be in this game, playing as much as he's going to be playing. So there more than likely is going to be a fumble. Again, could be Adrian, could be this new running back. It doesn't matter. We need to come down with those turnovers. Third key in the game, we need to get a lead early. If Adrian can make good decisions, if he can protect the ball, if the wide receivers can get open against these bad corners, susceptible corners, then we should be able to get some big gains in there. We should be able to be up a few scores by halftime. Like I mentioned, us offensively, we are dynamic. We have a lot of different weapons, a lot of different tools to use, and their defense just probably isn't used to seeing that outside of Ohio State when they played them, and Ohio State had 45 points. So if Ohio State can have 45 points and Miami of Ohio went over 300 yards and they had 26 points, then we shouldn't have a problem either. We should be able to get a few scores by halftime, and that allows in the second half for our second and third rotations to come in on both the offense and the defensive side of things. But to come in and relieve those guys, because as I mentioned, this is going to be our 8th game. Our guys are already tired and beat up. That allows us to switch over to a run-heavy focus team, kind of milk the clock at that point, and forces Minnesota to play a game that they don't like to. It forces them to pass the ball. It forces them to play more aggressively and play quicker, and they don't like to do that. And they're kind of getting a taste of their own medicine. We get to run the ball, and they have to pass it. Expectations and thoughts. As I mentioned, they're coming off the bye week, and this will be our 8th game in a row. We're tired mentally and physically. We've had a lot of close calls against big teams. We've played in a lot of big games this year, and we haven't had a bye week yet. So our guys are tired physically, obviously beat up against that kind of slate of opponents, but then mentally getting so close, but then never winning, never getting over that hump. That's got to be taking a toll on them, I'm sure. But PJ Fleck is a good coach. I know he gets a lot of flack for the way he dresses, the way he talks, the way he kind of holds himself, but I don't have a problem with PJ Fleck. I think that he's a good coach. If you look at what he's been able to do at Minnesota in the short time that he has been there, and I mean you can't deny that he does something good, does something well. But he's going to have some things schemed up. He's going to have that extra week of practice, the extra week to plan out a game against Nebraska, and so something's going to happen there. Downside to that is that Minnesota is without its best running back, and now they're without their best replacement as well. So they're down to their third string, so that might throw a wrench in his plans. I'm sure they knew about this before the bye week, so they've had 2 weeks to get this running back, or Tanner Morgan, if that's the way they're going to go heavy on. They've had 2 weeks to be able to get those guys ready. So despite that, though, we should be able to come in and shut down a young running back despite the line. He's going to be forced to make decisions. He's going to be forced to play at a high speed and play against big guys when he's undersized. So we should be able to shut him down regardless. We should be able to go up, as I mentioned, multiple scores by halftime. That allows the backups to come in and fill in, give some guys a break. But then that also allows our defense to play more pressure-based defense. We're able to blitz more if we're ahead. Again, forcing him to throw under pressure, forcing the guy to run into blitzes all the time, and that's just going to take a toll on them, I'm sure. Final prediction, the spread right now, it kind of grew. It started out at 3 in some places. It's up to 4 right now in Nebraska's favor. Over and under is at 48, so I have the score sitting at 41-17. I think the Huskers can win big here on the road. Minnesota's won 2 in a row. Last year we used we kind of went into this game. It's a historically tough matchup every time, but last year with COVID, they were missing a ton of dudes. Like, people would look across the sideline in Lincoln and see that they didn't have a ton of dudes even make the trip because they didn't have anybody because of the COVID protocol, and they still squeaked one out against us. So they're wounded. We can say that this year, but we kind of heard that last year and we still lost. So we can't take that too much into consideration, but I think they're wounded in a different way. This is a cheetah that likes to run with a broken leg. It's still dangerous. There's still claws and there's still teeth, but they are not able to use their biggest weapon, which is their run game. So I don't think that their third string running back, as good as he is, they brought him in for a reason, as PJ Fleck said. Like, we brought that guy into Minnesota for a reason, and the guys behind him too. So it's not going to be all that guy, since he is young and experienced. He's not up to size. He's not going to be able to carry it 35 times a game. They're going to be running by committee at this point, which is going to throw the timing off a little bit, I think. But they're not going to be able to just plug that guy into this offense and be able to run it the same as they did when Ibrahim was there or when Potts was there. They're going to have issues there, and I feel like Huskers are going to be able to capitalize on that. Outside of that, if we are able to disrupt that enough to where they have to start passing it, or if we get ahead to the point where they have to start passing it, because that's Minnesota's thing. Their best defense is the fact that they hold onto the ball as much as they can on offense, and they keep that clock going. They've held the ball for 40 minutes in some games, and I just don't see them being able to do that in this game, given their offense doesn't really have tools to go up against the black shirts. I just don't see them being able to hold the ball that long. And especially if they're behind and they have to start throwing the ball to catch up, they're not built for scoring quickly. So if we can get ahead, if we can hold them down on the run game, it's going to force them to play a game they don't like to play. And the Huskers really need this game. Minnesota obviously wants this game too. They're 3-2, but the Huskers need this game if they want to make a bowl game. They need this game. They need the next game against Purdue, and then they would still have to beat Ohio State, Wisconsin, or Iowa. They have to pick off one of those big teams that has always been an issue for them in the Big Ten. So this game in Purdue is more winnable as opposed to those last 3. So we can't get in a situation where we have to beat 2 of those last 3 teams. So this game and Purdue, we have to win these to keep the bowl dreams alive. Minnesota's going to struggle to move the ball, as I mentioned, and their defense, even when faced with Miami of Ohio, they still gave up 300-plus yards and gave up 26 points to a team that is 2-4 in the MAC. So if MAC teams can do that, if Bowling Green can get back to the quarterback as much as they do on defense, then our offense and defense shouldn't have any issues. I look at the stats, I watch the games. I just don't see any discernible reason why Nebraska doesn't go into this game and win convincingly. I don't. That 41-17 is just kind of a gut. I had it down as low as 30 at one point, but there's no discernible reason why Nebraska can't go in and win this game, and I just get a feeling it's going to be bigger than most people think. Most of the predictions I've been seeing across Twitter, across media, has been like 24-20, 20-17, somewhere in that region. And as I mentioned, I had this one lower at one point. I had it 30-24 at one point. I had it 30-20 at some point. But for some reason, 41-17 just seems to be... I feel good about that score. And some of that might come over on turnovers. I feel like turnovers are going to be a big part of the game, especially given the wind. But this is where I'm at as the preview goes. So that's going to wrap up this week's preview. We'll be back here on Sunday for a recap of the game. Hopefully it's a more positive one than last week's against Michigan. I still feel good about the way we played Michigan. It's just I hope that the officiating doesn't get in the way of this one. This is still a good matchup. We've played Minnesota more than any other team in the Big Ten. We played them all the way back to like 1900 when Minnesota was good, like consistently good. They had their heyday. We had ours in the 90s, but we've played them a ton of times. Actually, Minnesota's up in the overall record as well. So it'd be nice to get this one. Do you think I'm kind of off on Minnesota? Do you think I'm writing them off a little too easily? Do you think that there's something that they've been showing that I'm not seeing as an outside fan of Nebraska? Let me know. Let me know in the comments below. Let me know on Twitter at Cobsmacked Pod. But until next time, go Big Red.